Yes, thank you very much, Sean. And once again, a very big welcome to all of our attendees this morning. We'd like to say thank you to our sponsors, FEM and IOPSA, as well as SIOSH for accrediting these Toolbox Talks with one CPD point. Now, this morning, in fact, last week, we did say that we were going to discuss manual handling, but this has been pushed forward just purely because there has been a very big concern and a flood of emails coming in about the use of alcohol and narcotics in the workplace. Now, we know the standards have not changed for the consumption of alcohol and drugs in the workplace. But what about the very controversial subject around cannabis and the legalization that has just happened in South Africa? How does that affect you? How is it affecting all employers and employees in and around South Africa? And one of the things we want to discuss this morning is how does that affect the policies in terms of alcohol and narcotics as a combined policy that is currently being put in place? Is a review necessary? Have you already made these changes? And what are you currently doing to make sure that you are protected, not only as an employer, but also as an employee regarding the use of cannabis? So we are going to touch a little bit on this for reasons that South Africa has not laid down an actual law of the amount that is allowed to be used during private time or the actual use of it surrounding the workplace. There's no actual legislation. We are going to be looking at the Occupational Health and Safety Act as well as its regulations to determine exactly what we should be abiding by. So does this change the law, even though the legalization has happened? And how do you view it? So we'd love to have feedback from you guys, employers and employees alike. Please reach out so that we can have a discussion around this as well. We can get your feedback, and then do not forget, you can contact us anytime, even if it is a past Toolbox Talk topic. If it has affected you to a degree, please reach out and see if we cannot work together in making these topics a little bit more available to those out there in SA. So let's get started this morning, straight into it. First of all, we have to go to the law, especially with something as controversial as speaking about things like cannabis. And this would really fall under the definition of drugs. Now, if you would like to look at that, you're more than welcome just to type in to Google cannabis definition, and it will give you the cannabis definition of a plant, what that plant is, how it is divided into its different leaves, but it does give the actual synonym, which is different words that cannabis is used by, and things like marijuana, hashish, hemp, things like that. And what is this actual meaning? Well, it is the dried preparation of the flower tops or other parts of the plant in order to be smoked or consumed as a drug. All right, so there we've got the definition of what cannabis is, and it definitely falls under this definition. So it would form part of alcohol and drugs, as we are discussing this in the General Safety Regulations Section 2 under the subheading intoxication. So the reason why we've decided to obviously speak about this is because it is something that is happening in SA. It has been questioned, it has been queried to us, so we decided to have a discussion on this. So please remember, we are not stating that this is how we feel as a law. We are just going to discuss the law around alcohol and drugs, remembering that cannabis falls into the definition of a drug. So let us take a look at what the Occupational Health and Safety Act states. Under Section 2A of the General Safety Regulations, it says that an employer or a user, as the case may be, shall not permit any person who is or who appears to be under the influence of intoxicating liquor or drugs to enter or remain at a workplace. So health and safety regulations are stating that in order to keep a workplace free of risks and hazards, in order to maintain a safer working environment, there cannot be any person who is allowed to enter or remain in that workplace that is under the influence, or notice, appears to be under the influence of intoxicating liquor. Now, this is not discrimination at all. If you appear to be under a specific intoxicating drug or alcohol, you may be requested to go for a test. So nobody is singling you out. Nobody is saying that you have in fact done that. You would then just be taken to another place, obviously in private, as the policy for your company allows, and then you will be tested for this alcohol or drug. But notice that the law is very, very specific. It's speaking about an employer or a user. Now, we're not talking about a user of the actual drugs or alcohol. We are talking about a user of machinery. So an employer in his own right, which is every single company in South Africa, has the legal right to check or not permit any person who is under the influence or appears to be under the influence of either alcohol or any drugs. So the user of machinery then could be any person who operates any plant or machinery on site. And this person is also not allowed to be under the influence of any alcohol or drugs. Now, you will see the wisdom in this. If we had to operate a heavy machine, let's say a 50 to 100 ton crane on a construction site, we're putting in beams or columns for the foundations and the structures. And this person who is operating the crane was under the influence of alcohol or drugs. Would you feel comfortable working below that person, installing whatever it is that they were guiding to your working area? Well, no doubt you would have a little bit of uneasy feelings. Or perhaps you would be outright saying, I refuse to work under those conditions. Well, really, this is what the law is stating. No employee should be allowed to work in a situation where the potential for their harm is coming from a person who is under the influence of an intoxicating liquor or drug. Now, cannabis, actually, what we can say is very similar to alcohol in the way that no person in South Africa is banned from drinking alcohol. Now, we know that alcohol use in South Africa is fine. Everybody is allowed to drink alcohol as long as you are over the age of 18. And for some of those who are under, as long as you have a parent with you, then they state that you are under a guardian and thus also able to use alcohol. But really, can you drink alcohol at work? Well, the general safety regulation continues. Subject to the provision of sub-regulation 3, no person at a workplace shall be under the influence or have in his possession or partake or offer any person any intoxicating liquor or drugs. And again, cannabis would fall under the definition of drugs. So you're not allowed to have it on you. You're not allowed to partake of it, and you're not allowed to offer it to someone else. So really, we could look at any drug, including the use, possession, or offering of cannabis in the workplace, the same way we would look at alcohol. Yes, the Constitution of South Africa states that you, as a South African citizen, are allowed to drink alcohol. And perhaps over a long weekend with blistering heat days, you're going to partake in the use of alcohol. However, you would not partake in it so heavily the night before you get to work that you would get to work almost intoxicated. Well, why is that? Well, because the policy of your company is that you are not allowed to be intoxicated at work, and thus disciplinary action can be taken if it is deemed that you are still in an intoxicated state while at work. The disciplinary action should be no different for any other type of intoxicating liquor or any other type of drug, including cannabis. So it is illegal from an occupational health and safety standpoint to be in possession of, partake of, or offer any type of liquor, drugs, including cannabis, at the workplace. Now, this is not going against the Constitution of South Africa. As we mentioned, it is still a decriminalized issue when it comes to cannabis. However, the fact that you're allowed to drink alcohol anywhere you want to within South Africa at a legal age does not mean you can partake of it at work, and thus cannabis would be very similar. So then, what are we actually saying according to the law? Well, this is the last part of the general safety regulation under the subheading of intoxication. Again, speaking about an employer of a company as well as the user of any type of plant or machinery. It says, shall in the case where a person is taking medicine, so here we are saying, all right, if you are sick and you have a medical condition, you might have to take a certain medication. Now that could encompass any type of medication that is prescribed by a legitimate doctor. So somebody who has actually had a qualification and has become a doctor and has prescribed medication. So not medication that you made in the backyard. We're talking about actual prescribed medication. The user or an employer will only allow such a person to perform his or her duties at the workplace if the side effects of such medication do not constitute a threat to the health or safety of the person who is actually taking the medication or other persons at such a workplace. So again, it really lands in the seat of those who are taking the lead in occupational health and safety. And we're talking about a management position. We're not talking about just safety reps or safety officers. We're talking about upper management, including employers. You need to have a handle on what your policy is regarding alcohol and the use of drugs and the use of medication, which falls under the definition of drugs inside your company, as well as the use, possession, or offering of these types of alcohol and drugs outside of your property, remembering that any vehicle that is owned or branded by the company becomes a public property. It's not private. It's not your own private vehicle. Because it is a company vehicle, it falls under public because it is used as a public service, thus going out to site or even on a client's premises. So please keep this in mind when looking at your current policies and procedures, as well as maybe in the near future on reviewing how you go about looking at this new legalization of cannabis. But what we are really trying to say is with the use of any alcohol or drugs, including cannabis, even though it has been legalized, just like alcohol is legalized, it is not worth the cost. Not only can you lose your job if you drink alcohol or use drugs at work, you could injure yourself and you could also injure others around you. Alcohol and drugs will affect your work and your skills. Remember, drug and alcohol use will cost you more than just your salary or job. It can cost you your life, and it has cost many their lives when they have used or consumed alcohol or drugs in the workplace while they are affecting themselves as well as others around them. So let us really think clearly, very deeply. We are adults, we are not children. And even then, we also want to teach our children the right use of these things when they get older. So what is your standpoint? Where do you stand on the use of alcohol? Obviously, for private consumption, there's nothing wrong, but the amount and perhaps drugs or even cannabis, as we are speaking about this morning. Well, maybe you see that you yourself have a problem or somebody else in the workplace has a problem. Now, again, we do not want to be exclusive and say, well, no matter what, this person must have disciplinary action and they must leave. We also have to remember that this is a human being and all of us go through issues in our life. So if you are suffering or you know of somebody that is suffering with an addiction to alcohol and drugs, why not get the help? Rather try and help this person, including yourself, to reach out and recover. It's never too late. And you can find websites that can assist those who have an addiction to alcohol and drugs. And perhaps you can put them on a bit of a program to assist this person to get their life back on track. So before we just easily dismiss the person, why not think about trying to readjust this man, giving them a second chance and seeing if you can fit that into your policy or procedures or the way you design your uh, policies around alcohol and drugs in the workplace. Remember, there are different tiers to discipline. Perhaps it's going to be just step number 1 and step number 2 in the beginning in a private setting. And also remember that anytime somebody reaches out to you and tells you that they perhaps have a problem, remember to keep this private and keep it confidential. This information could also hurt that person, and thus we want to deal with it as adults and get the person the needed help that they deserve. So this is just a quote from someone you might know. What counts in life is not the mere fact that we have lived. It is the difference we have made to the lives of others that will determine the significance of the life we lead. So not only do we want to take action against danger within our workplace, we also want to have an impact on the lives of people. So before dismissing anybody who has made a mistake, because let's be honest, all of us do. We are imperfect. We make mistakes many times. You would want to be given a second chance, especially if you were really genuine in your decision to try and change a certain thing that you had done. So the significance of your life will only be determined on what difference you have made to the life of others. And this is including in health and safety. And no matter what we do or what we do not do, we want to ensure that the impact that we have is not a negative one, but a positive reinforcement of legislation, our own morals, as well as the well-being of those around us. So thank you very much for listening to this Toolbox Talk. As we mentioned, the updated legislation on the use of cannabis, we are still waiting for a little bit more definitions and a little bit more updates from the government on this, but we'd like to hear from you as well, and then leave you with this final quote. This came from Stansfield, which came out in 2018 when the legalization of cannabis came out. And this is just a quote from Stansfield. It says, if the nature of your employment is such that you are governed by occupational health and safety legislation, which says you may not operate a certain type of machine under the influence of an intoxicating substance, and you do come to work under the influence and operate that machine, it will be a criminal offense. It will be a breach of the specific health and safety regulation. So please remember that it does fall under the same category. And if you do not have a policy in place, why not sit down and get yourself a policy for the use and also possession of any liquor or intoxicating substance. So once again, thank you very much for joining us this morning. We do not want to keep you any longer, but just give you the reminders about the occupational health and safety training coming up for the rest of this year in 2019. So in Gauteng, we are going to be with you for September and October, and then we are arranging the south of the Cape, basically around the George Neisner area. We're going to be coming to you in November, and we'll send you out those dates. So if you are from that area, please reach out to us, and we'd love to train you when we are there. So don't forget the dates. For those of you in Gauteng, any IOPSA member may send 2 of your employees free of charge for each of these courses. So you can send 2 people for fire and 2 people for first aid. Get in touch with us, chris@ohss.co.za, safety@iopsa.org, and info@ohss.co.za. Now, I do apologize. I'm currently out of range to be called on my cell phone number, but if you do take my cell phone number down, you can WhatsApp me or just get a hold of us through email. And that number is shown there, 071 875 2070. And then next week, we look forward to having the how-to topic, as it is the first of the month, on incident reporting. What should you do as an organization in your private company? And then what is legislation telling you to do when it comes to incidents and accidents that need to be reported to the Department of Labor? How do you go about doing that? And we just want to remind you about the specific types of documentation as well as the procedure for reporting these incidents correctly. So thank you very much. We look forward to speaking to you next week, and also speaking to you about cannabis as a fairly important issue currently within South Africa, and how it is being handled within different industries. So thank you very much, and we'll hand it over back to you, Sean.
All right, perfect. Thanks so much, Chris. We do have a couple of questions here this morning. The first of which reads, what can you do if an employee refuses a drug test?
Well, what I would suggest to you, first of all, thank you very much for that question. First of all, you have to follow your policy in the company. So what is the policy if someone refuses taking a drug test? Please remember that obviously all information will remain confidential from a medical perspective, but there's nothing that guides you or gives you a law on how you handle those situations. This will be according to your specific policy. So perhaps just go back to your company's policy, see how you have to handle that. Remember, if you have an HR department, leave it up to them. And then also make sure that the way your policy is structured is not only designed around the Occupational Health and Safety Act, but also around the Constitution of South Africa about how to treat employees. Thanks, Sean.
All right, perfect. The next question here reads, our business sometimes has a braai on the last day of the year before shutdown. Each employee is allowed to have one drink, which is provided by the employer. The braai takes place on the company premises, but the workers will not be doing any work on the day. Is this illegal in terms of regulations?
Well, that's a very difficult one to comment on, Sean. This does happen in and around South Africa very, very often. What they do say is it constitutes an outside employment time. So in other words, you are not currently on the clock, and thus it's like you are gathered at a friend's house on a public holiday, which falls on a Monday. However, you are not actually working at that time. So if your employer decides that that specific time that has been set aside is not employment time and it is outside the use of employment, and you're not going to be performing any works, then I don't see the issue with it. But before giving you actual confirmation on that, I'd like to first do research on how that affects the Occupational Health and Safety Act, and then maybe get back to you if I can. I'd like to maybe give that answer to you next week. Maybe I can even give it on the actual Toolbox talk when we do incident reporting. But I'd like to first just clarify what the law says around that, if you don't mind. Thanks, Sean.
Right, perfect. I will go ahead and send you that question then after the session. The second question we've got here is, how do we test a suspected user of cannabis or any other drug store, stop them entering the workplace?
Now, that is a very good question. This is why we are actually discussing the use of cannabis because of its current legalization and decriminalization in South Africa. And this is because we have clear policies as employers within our company. And the rules are no different for cannabis than it is for an intoxicating liquor like alcohol. However, alcohol can be tested fairly easily. we get alcohol tests at your local dispensary, and there you can actually test to see whether the person is under the influence. But there is no accurate test currently for whether the person still has the effects of cannabis on them. And keeping in mind that if a person does use cannabis pretty regularly, cannabis can actually be found in the system, especially in the bloodstream and on the fat cells, with up to about a month after the use of cannabis. And for those who use it irregularly, it's up to 3 to 7 days after the use that it can still be found in the bloodstream. Now, this is the reason why we are discussing this, and we are hoping to try and get a solution on the testing of that person. So at this stage, it is left up to the honesty of the employer and the employee's relationship to find out whether the employee has used it on the day, because remembering, this is the issue. The issue is the use of it on the day. If he smoked it on the Sunday, yes, it will still be in his system, but after a certain amount of hours, the effects of that would have worn off. It's really up to the relationship between the employee and employer at this stage until the clarification of the amount of use really comes out from the government, and also then the way to test the amount that is still left over, or the residual effects of that person. So it is a difficult one to answer, and I do apologize that we don't have that information yet, but this is why we are discussing it. We'd like to chat to you, get out to see what you guys in South Africa actually find out or figure out on your own, and see if we cannot make this information as widespread as possible. So perhaps somebody else in the audience maybe knows more about this, the testing of actual cannabis, and we'd love to hear from you. Thanks, Sean.
Right, perfect. And I do think we have got time for one more question, so I'm going to go ahead and give it to you. It reads, as a company that was experiencing high intoxication, we have decided to shame the staff by displaying their names on a notice board. Is that in any way contravening any laws?
Well, if you think about it, a person who has an alcohol addiction wouldn't want their name displayed anywhere. Again, this is something that I'd have to go back and do some research on. I cannot give you a blanket answer on that. Just from an ethical point of view, it seems like shaming a person would not really bring out what you are trying to achieve on a positive note, looking at this entire thing from a positive aspect on getting the help that a person needs and keeping people safe. It may just take your safety system or policy and turn it into a negative one. And as soon as it becomes negative, obviously then there's always a negative connotation, which is sometimes never good. Discipline, however, does have its place in the workplace. So if I can, if you would allow me again to maybe just send me that question, I'd like to do some research on how this would affect the person's constitution, as well as the Labor Relations Act on the use of their names to name and shame, as you mentioned it, and then perhaps give you a little bit more of a clearer understanding of what the law states around that. I'd have to first, again, as I said, just do a little bit of research, if I may. Thanks, Sean.
All right, perfect. Well, guys, it is about to go 7:30, so I will be ending the session off now. We do have quite a few questions left still, Chris, so I'm going to be sending those to you a little bit later during the day.
Thank you, Sean.
But other than that, guys, thanks so much for joining us. I hope you enjoy the rest of your week. Chris, would you like to say anything to end off?
No, just a very big thank you to all of the attendees, and also for those who sent through the questions on this issue. We obviously have not concluded everything about the use of cannabis, either privately and then coming to work afterwards, or even in the workplace, and how this is going to be handled within the near future in South Africa. But obviously we are waiting for legislation to come out. But again, a lot of times regulations are based on the fact of how you as employers and employees feel about the use of these things, and then a government gazette can be drafted on the actions of people. So if you feel that you need to take action against these certain things, or you have an opinion on it, rather let us put our heads together and come up with a good solution now, so that we can maybe influence the decision of Parliament at a later stage. So thank you very much to everyone that had a handle in this, and for you, Sean. You don't say much, but we really appreciate what you do, making sure that everything runs smooth there in the back. Thank you.